She pressed her newborn against her chest with both hands and dropped to her knees on a stranger's porch. Not from weakness, because she had nothing left. 3 days without food, miles without shoes. And her baby boy had stopped crying 20 minutes ago, and that silence was the most terrifying sound she had ever heard. She lifted him toward the man standing in the doorway and whispered through cracked lips, "Take my baby. Please. Just let him live." Then the world went black beneath her. If this story moves you, please subscribe to this channel and follow along until the very last word, because this one doesn't end where you think it does. Drop your city in the comments right now. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you know a woman who has ever felt invisible, share this with her. She needs to hear it. The baby had been quiet for too long. Savannah Cole knew the difference between a sleeping infant and something worse. She had been a mother for 11 days. 11 days was long enough to learn the difference. And as she walked along the cracked edge of a West Texas highway in the dying light of a July afternoon, she pressed 2 fingers gently against her son's neck and felt the flutter there, thin as paper, slow as dripping water, and she kept walking. Because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant knowing how bad things really were. Her feet had long since gone past pain. The asphalt had burned through her shoes 2 days ago, and she'd thrown the ruined leather aside somewhere outside of a town she didn't know the name of. She didn't remember exactly when her right foot had started bleeding, only that it had, and only that she hadn't stopped. The bundle against her chest was the only reason she was still upright. If she fell on top of him, and that she would not do. The last town had been Mercer's Fork, population 400 and something. She'd walked into the general store with her baby in her arms and her hair matted to the side of her face, and before she could even open her mouth, the woman behind the counter had looked her up and down, all of her, all the heaviness of her body after 11 days of near starvation, all the sweat and road dust and desperation, and said loud enough for everyone in the store to hear, "We don't give charity to women who clearly can't manage themselves." A man near the back had laughed. Savannah had turned around and walked back out into the heat. She had not asked for charity. She had not asked for anything. She had only walked through the door. And that had been enough for them to decide everything they needed to know about her. Derek had always said the same thing. You walk into a room and people already know what you are. Savannah, they can see it. I can see it. The whole world can see it. 3 years of marriage. 3 years of that voice in her ear every morning, every night, every moment between. She had believed him. Lord help her, she had believed every word. She shifted the baby against her chest. "I know, sweetheart," she whispered, even though he hadn't made a sound. "I know, just a little further." She didn't know if that was true. The sun was dropping toward the flat horizon, and the heat was changing from vicious to something almost worse, a thick, breathless warmth that sat on her chest like a stone. She could feel her heartbeat in her temples. She could feel her lips cracking when she breathed. She had drunk water from a ditch that morning, and she had not let herself think about what was in it, because what was in it didn't matter nearly as much as not dying. The baby's name was Thomas. She had named him that herself the morning after he was born, while Derek was still asleep in the next room of their house outside of Abilene. She'd held him in the gray morning light and said the name quietly, like a promise, Thomas. You are Thomas, and you are mine. She had not asked Derek. She had not told him. When he woke up, he'd looked at the baby for a long moment and said the child didn't look right, and then he'd left the room. That was the moment she knew she was leaving. Not because of anything he said. She'd heard worse. But because of the way Thomas had turned his face toward her voice when Derek spoke, turned away from the sound like even at 1 day old, he understood something was wrong in that house. And Savannah had pressed her son against her chest and made him a different kind of promise. Not here. You will not grow up in this. Getting out had been a matter of waiting. 3 days. She'd packed nothing except diapers, the small tin of formula she'd managed to buy, before Derek cut off her access to money, and the blue blanket her mother had mailed from Oklahoma 6 months ago, the only thing in that house that belonged entirely to her. She'd left at 3 in the morning while Derek snored, walked out the back door, walked past the truck she wasn't allowed to drive, and started down the highway toward nothing in particular, which was still better than what she was leaving behind. That had been 9 days ago. She had made it further than she expected. She had not made it far enough. "Miss," the voice came from the side of the road, and Savannah's whole body locked up. She turned her head slowly, every muscle tensed, because strange men calling to her from the side of roads was exactly the kind of thing she had been running from for 9 days. But the man standing at the fence line wasn't moving toward her. He was holding a post hole digger, and he was looking at her the way people looked at something they weren't sure how to categorize. He was maybe 60 years old. Sun-browned face, white whiskers on his chin. He had the look of a man who had spent his entire life doing honest physical work, which meant nothing about whether he was safe, but which was at least something. "You all right?" he said. "Yes, sir," Savannah said. Her voice came out wrong, scraped thin, too quiet. She wanted to argue. She had made an art of arguing against what was plainly visible. 3 years of pretending she was fine had built the skill into her bones. But Thomas chose that moment to make a sound, not a cry, not even close to a cry, just a small wet exhalation that was the worst sound she had ever heard, because it was the sound of something running out, and Savannah stopped arguing. "A mile," she repeated. "Just about. White fence posts. You can't miss it." The man who opened the door was not what she expected. He was younger than she'd imagined, a rancher out here to be. Maybe 32, 33, with dark eyes and the kind of stillness in his face that came either from peace or from grief, and she would find out later it was mostly the second. He was wearing a work shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbow, and he had his hat in his hand like he'd just taken it off a moment before, and he looked at her without any of the things she'd learned to brace for, without assessment, without disgust, without the slow, evaluating sweep of a man deciding what kind of woman he was looking at. He just looked at her. "Sir," Savannah said. Her voice was barely sound. "A man named Clem sent me. He said—" And then Thomas made the sound again, the wrong sound, the quiet, running out sound, and every other word left her. She held her son up toward the man in the doorway, both hands, arms shaking, and she said the only thing left inside her, "Take my baby. Please. Just let him live." The man moved before she finished speaking. "Come inside," he said, and his voice was low and even and held no hesitation whatsoever. He took Thomas from her arms with both hands, and Savannah felt the absence of the weight like a wound, but before she could fall, his other arm caught her at the elbow and held. "I got you," he said. "Don't let go." She didn't have the strength to argue. She didn't have the strength for anything except putting one foot in front of the other, which she did 3 times, until she was inside the door, and there was a chair beneath her, and the world stopped moving. "Lily!" The man's voice carried through the house without being loud. That was something Savannah noticed even then. He had a voice that carried without needing to be raised. "Lily, come here, please." Small feet on a wood floor. Then a girl appeared in the doorway of the kitchen, 6 years old, maybe 7, dark-haired and serious-faced, wearing an apron far too large for her body. She looked at Savannah. She looked at the baby her father was holding. Her face did the particular thing children's faces do when they are deciding how to feel about something new. "Is that a real baby?" Lily said. "It is," Ethan Hayes said. "Go get the tin of formula from the top shelf in the pantry, the one behind the canning jars." Lily's eyes went wide. "We got formula since when?" "Since Mrs. Aldrich left it here in March in case of emergency. This is an emergency. Go." She went. Ethan sat down across from Savannah with Thomas held against his chest, and he looked at the baby with a focused, quiet attention that told Savannah he had done this before, held something small and fragile, and been responsible for keeping it alive. He pressed 2 fingers to Thomas's cheek. He checked his hands. He watched his chest rise and fall. "How old?" he asked. 11 days. "How long since he ate?" Savannah closed her eyes briefly. "I fed him this morning, from what I had left. It wasn't much." How long since you ate? She didn't answer. Ma'am? I'm fine. He looked up at her. His eyes were very dark and very direct and not unkind. You're not fine, he said. But we'll work on that. What's his name? Thomas. Something moved across Ethan Hayes' face, a flicker of something she couldn't read. That's a good name, he said quietly. Lily came back with the tin and a bottle she'd already begun to assemble, which meant this child was more capable than most adults Savannah had encountered in the last 9 days. Ethan prepared the formula with one hand, Thomas against his chest with the other, and Savannah watched him do it. Watched a man who had clearly once known how to do this, who moved through the motions with a practiced quietness that meant he had done this in grief alone, without anyone watching. And something cracked open in her chest that she did not entirely understand. Thomas took the bottle. He took it and he drank, and the sound of him drinking was the most beautiful sound Savannah Cole had heard in her entire life. She covered her mouth with her hand. She would not cry in front of these strangers. She had made that decision approximately half a mile back, and she intended to hold to it. She held to it for about 4 seconds. Ethan Hayes pretended not to notice. He kept his eyes on Thomas and let her cry, and did not say anything comforting, which was the most respectful thing anyone had done for her in recent memory. Lily, however, had no such restraint. The girl crossed the room, climbed up onto the arm of Savannah's chair, with the absolute confidence of someone who had decided the situation required her presence, and patted Savannah's arm 3 times. It's okay, Lily said. Daddy says crying means you still care. People who stopped caring don't cry anymore. Savannah looked at the girl. He told you that when I cried about Mama. Lily said it plainly with the directness of a child who had made peace with something by saying it often enough. Daddy said it means I still love her, which I do, even though I never really met her. Savannah wiped her face with the back of her hand. I'm sorry about your mama. Lily shrugged in the way children shrug when they are being brave. Daddy says she would have been real nice. Then she looked at Thomas, who was still drinking. He's pretty small. He is, Savannah agreed. What's his name? Thomas. Lily considered this. I'll call him Tommy. Ethan said from across the room. You'll ask first. Can I call him Tommy? Lily said immediately, looking at Savannah. Savannah almost laughed. You can call him Tommy. Lily nodded, satisfied, as if this had all been a very efficient negotiation. Ethan set the empty bottle aside and adjusted Thomas against his shoulder and stood up. He carried the baby toward Savannah with the same careful evenness with which he did everything, and he held the child out to her. She took him back, and pressed him against her chest, and felt the warmth of him, the fed warmth, the alive warmth, and she breathed. There's a room at the back of the house, Ethan said. It's nothing fancy, just a bed and a window, but it's cool at night if you keep the window open. He paused. You're welcome to it. Savannah looked up at him. I can't pay you. I didn't ask you to. I don't know you. No, he said. You don't. Why would you? Ma'am, Ethan said quietly. You walked up to my door in the dark of night with bleeding feet and a baby that needed feeding, and you asked me to save him before you asked me to save you. He picked up his hat from the table. That tells me plenty about what kind of woman you are. The rest can wait. He turned toward the kitchen. Supper's been on for an hour. It ain't going to waste. Lily slid off the arm of the chair and followed her father, announcing as she went, I made the biscuits. Daddy made the stew. The biscuits are better. Lily. It's true. Savannah sat in the chair for another moment. She looked down at Thomas, at the rise and fall of his chest, at his small closed fist pressed against her collarbone, at the particular way his eyebrows drew together when he slept the same way hers did. Derek had told her once that the baby probably wasn't his anyway, and therefore not his problem, and she had learned in that moment that a person could go cold all the way through in under a second. She stood up. It took effort. Her legs had not fully forgiven her. But she stood up and she carried Thomas toward the kitchen, toward the light and the smell of food, and the sound of a small girl arguing cheerfully about biscuit quality. And she sat down at a stranger's table, and she ate. She did not apologize for eating. She had not realized she'd stopped until she noticed she hadn't done it even once. The supper was quiet mostly. Lily filled the silences which needed filling, and Ethan let her, which told Savannah something about the kind of father he was, the kind who understood that a child's voice was not an interruption, but a gift, something to be allowed rather than managed. He asked Savannah nothing about where she'd come from, or why she was walking alone on a West Texas highway at nightfall with an 11-day-old infant. He asked only if she needed more bread, and if Thomas was sleeping well in general, and if she took her coffee with anything. She took it plain. He nodded like she'd said something reasonable. After supper, he showed her the back room. It was plain as he'd said, just a bed, a washstand, a window looking out toward the dark shapes of the cattle pasture. But the sheets were clean. And on the floor beside the bed, she saw a wooden crate lined with a folded blanket, sitting at just the right height. "For the baby," Ethan said. "Best I could manage tonight. I'll do better tomorrow." "This is—" Savannah stopped, started again. "This is more than I expected." "It ain't much." "Sir," she said, and her voice came out steadier than she felt. 3 towns refused to let me through their doors today. One woman told me I was too fat to deserve help. A man in Mercer's Fork said my baby looked wrong. She held Thomas closer. "This room is more than I expected. I mean that." Ethan stood in the doorway with his hat in his hand, and he was quiet for a moment in the way he was quiet, not empty but full of something he was deciding whether to say. "People look at what's in front of them," he said finally, "and they think they're seeing the truth. Most of the time they're just seeing themselves." He set his hat on the peg beside the door. "Sleep. Thomas'll tell you when he needs you." He pulled the door shut behind him. Savannah stood in the middle of the room for a long time. Then she set Thomas in the crate carefully, the way you set down something you would die to protect. And she sat on the edge of the bed, and she pressed both palms flat against her thighs, and she breathed. She was alive. Thomas was alive. She was in a stranger's house, and she did not know what morning would bring, and Derek Cole was somewhere behind her on a road she had walked in blood and heat, and she would not let herself think yet about what he would do when he found out she was gone, because if she started thinking about that, she would not stop, and she needed to sleep. She needed to sleep so she could be alive tomorrow. She laid down on top of the covers in her road-dirty dress, and she closed her eyes, and she listened to Thomas breathe. And somewhere in the distance through the window, Ethan Hayes had left cracked for the cool air. The Texas night moved through the grassland with a sound like water, slow and wide and indifferent, the way the land always was, indifferent to suffering, indifferent to joy, moving forward regardless. She was still here. She had made it to morning once already. She could do it again. What she could not have known lying in that room, half asleep before her head fully met the pillow, was that by morning the town of Callaway would already know she was there. That someone passing on the highway had seen her climb those porch steps. That by the time the sun came up, over the flat edge of West Texas mouths were already moving in kitchens and at fence lines, and across dry goods counters, saying things about the large woman who had shown up at Ethan Hayes's ranch, saying things the way people say things when they have decided someone is a story instead of a person. And somewhere on a road between Abilene and nowhere, a man named Derek Cole was asking questions, getting answers, and driving west. She was awake before Thomas cried. That was how her body had learned to work in 11 days of motherhood, listening even in sleep, tuned to a frequency only she could hear. She was sitting up with him before he made the second sound, and by the time the gray light outside the window shifted from gray to gold, she had fed him, changed him, and wrapped him back into the blue blanket her mother had sent from Oklahoma, and she was sitting on the edge of the bed wondering what exactly she was supposed to do next. She had not planned past surviving. She was not sure she had the right to plan anything yet. The smell of coffee reached her before she heard any movement in the house. She sat with it for a moment, the smell of a kitchen that someone lived in, that someone cared about. And then she set Thomas gently in the crate and stood up and looked at herself in the small mirror above the washstand. She looked away almost immediately. Derek had trained her to do that. had trained her to look and then look away, because looking too long led to thinking too long, and thinking too long led to the kind of sadness he said she brought on herself. You know what you are, Savannah. Looking harder at it won't change it. 3 years of that had made the mirror feel like a verdict rather than a reflection. She straightened her dress as best she could, ran her fingers through her hair, squared her shoulders the way her mother had always told her to, back when her mother still said things that were meant to hold her up rather than hold her back. Then she picked up Thomas and walked out of the room. Ethan was already at the stove. He glanced over when she came in, and there was nothing in that glance. No assessment, no visible calculation, just acknowledgement. The way you look at someone who belongs in a room. Coffee's ready, he said. Thomas sleep. Better than I did, Savannah said. That's usually how it works. He poured a cup and set it on the table. Lily won't be up for another 20 minutes. She negotiates hard on that subject. Savannah almost smiled. She sat down and wrapped both hands around the cup. Mr. Hayes? Ethan, she paused. Ethan, I want to be straight with you about my situation. He turned from the stove. He did not say anything, which she was learning was his way of telling her he was listening. My husband is going to come looking for me, she said. I don't know how long I have before he does, and when he finds out I'm here... She stopped, started over. I don't want trouble for your family, for Lily. If I need to move on before... You're not moving on anywhere, Ethan said. I'm not asking you to. You've got bleeding feet and a baby that's not 2 weeks old, he said. You're not moving on anywhere, not today. You don't know what Derek is capable of. Ethan turned back to the stove. I reckon I've got a fair idea. The quiet between them had weight in it, and Savannah didn't push against it. She drank her coffee. Thomas made a small sound against her shoulder. Satisfied, not alarmed, and she rubbed his back the way she'd taught herself to, in the first few days, the slow circles that told him the world was still steady beneath them. It was the most ordinary morning she had experienced in a very long time, and that was what made it frightening. The sound of a wagon on the road outside broke the quiet before Lily even came down for breakfast. Ethan heard it first. Something shifted in the line of his shoulders, not quite tension, but awareness. He set his spoon against the side of the pot. Stay in here, he said, and he walked to the front of the house. Savannah stood up. She heard the wagon stop. She heard a woman's voice, high and carrying. Ethan Hayes, I heard you had company last night. I thought I'd come by with something for the... A pause. Is everything all right in there? And another woman's voice lower. I heard she just walked up out of nowhere. In that state. Savannah moved to the doorway between the kitchen and the front room. She couldn't see the women, but she could hear them plain enough through the open front door, and she could see Ethan standing on the porch with his arms at his sides and his weight slightly forward. Mornin', Mrs. Holt, he said. We just wanted to make sure you were all right. The first woman's voice was sweetened with concern that sounded like it had been practiced in front of its own mirror. A woman in that condition showing up alone, well, it can be difficult to know what you're dealing with. I know exactly what I'm dealing with, Ethan said. Is she still here? She is. A pause. Then the second woman's voice again, quieter, not quite quiet enough. She was enormous, Martha said. Came up the road looking like she'd been dragged, and with a newborn no less. You have to wonder what kind of woman... The kind who walked across half of Texas to keep her baby alive, Ethan said. The silence that followed was the particular kind that comes when someone says the exact true thing into the exact wrong expectation. Well, Mrs. Holt said, recovering, we only meant to help. Thank you for the concern, Ethan said. Have a good morning. Savannah heard the wagon move. She stepped back from the doorway before Ethan came inside, but he knew she'd heard. He walked past her into the kitchen and picked up his spoon again and said nothing about it, which was the right thing and the wrong thing at the same time, because the silence made her feel seen in a way she didn't know how to carry yet. People talk, she said. They do, he agreed. About me. About everything they don't understand. He stirred the pot. Don't take it personal. It is personal. He looked at her, then directly the way he had on the porch the night before. Yes, he said. It is. I'm sorry for that. He didn't qualify it, didn't soften it or explain it away, just acknowledged it straight and plain and went back to stirring. Savannah sat back down. She was still sitting there when Lily appeared in the kitchen doorway, in her nightgown hair sticking out in 4 directions, with the specific severity of a child who has decided to be awake and is committing fully to the experience. She looked at Savannah. She looked at Thomas. She looked at the coffee cup. Is there any left for me? Lily said. You don't drink coffee, Ethan said. I'm older now. You're 6. Almost 7. Almost 7 doesn't drink coffee. Lily turned to Savannah. Do you think I'm old enough for coffee? Savannah kept her face straight with considerable effort. I think that's between you and your father. You could advocate for me. Lily, Ethan said in a tone that carried absolutely no heat but enormous finality. Sit down and eat your breakfast. Lily sat. She accepted a bowl of oatmeal with the resigned dignity of someone who has lost a negotiation they expected to lose but felt obligated to attempt. Then she looked at Savannah and said with a child's total absence of transition, Where's your husband? Lily. Ethan started. It's all right, Savannah said. She looked at the little girl and chose her words the way you choose footing on uncertain ground. He's not here. Lily considered this. Is he bad? Lily. Daddy, I'm asking because I want to understand. Lily looked at him with perfect seriousness. Mrs. Patterson at church says you can tell a lot about a person by whether their husband shows up. So I'm asking why Miss Savvy's husband didn't show up. Savannah felt the name land in her chest before she could stop it. Miss Savvy. Lily said it the way children said things they'd decided on not as a question, but as a fact already established. He doesn't know where we are, Savannah said carefully. Lily's face changed. It went from inquisitive to something older the way children's faces sometimes skipped ahead. Is that why you came here, so he wouldn't find you? Lily. Ethan's voice was quiet. That's enough. I'm not trying to be mean, Lily said, looking between them. She stopped. Then quietly, I just want to know if you're staying. The kitchen went still. Savannah looked at the little girl across the table, this small, serious, motherless child, who had climbed onto the arm of her chair the night before, and patted her arm, and told her. Crying meant she still cared, and she felt something pull taut and painful in the center of her chest. I don't know yet, she said honestly. Lily nodded like honesty was something she recognized and respected even when it wasn't the answer she wanted. Okay, she said, and she went back to her oatmeal. Ethan met Savannah's eyes over the top of Lily's head. He didn't say anything. But the look said enough. The morning moved. Ethan went out to the cattle. Lily followed Savannah around the house in the particular way of children who have decided someone is interesting, offering observations about everything about the spider. In the corner of the front room that she had named Gerald, and did not want killed about the fact that her father made his biscuits wrong, and she was trying to teach him about the 3 horses in the back pasture, and their distinct personalities, which she described with the gravity of a woman who had known them for decades. Savannah listened. She fed Thomas when he needed it. She sat in the shade of the porch when the heat came up, because the heat came up fast in July in West Texas, and she held her son, and she listened to Lily talk, and for the first time in 3 years, she was not thinking about how much space she was taking up. It was around mid-morning when the man from town arrived. Not Mrs. Holt this time. A man. Mid-40s in a suit jacket despite the heat, with the particular bearing of someone who had held a small amount of authority for long enough that he'd mistaken it for something permanent. He came up the road in a single-horse buggy, and Savannah saw him from the porch, and the old alarm went through her body before she could stop it. The full-body tightening that 3 years with Derek had made automatic. She stood up. Lily appeared at the screen door. That's Mr. Ferris, she said. He runs the bank. He's not nice. Lily. Savannah said. "Go inside." "But, please." Lily went. The screen door banged behind her. Mr. Ferris tied his horse and walked up to the porch with his eyes on Savannah in a way that made her feel like she was being measured for something she hadn't agreed to be measured for. He stopped at the bottom of the steps. "Morning," he said. His eyes moved over her once slow, and his expression did the thing she had seen on 100 faces, the brief, decisive downward evaluation that people thought they were hiding and weren't. "Good morning," Savannah said. "Ethan around?" "He's working." Ferris rocked back on his heels. "I'll wait." "He could be a while." "I don't mind." He looked at Thomas. "That your baby?" "Yes." "Husband around?" Savannah said nothing. "Only asking," Ferris said in the tone of a man who was not only asking because Ethan's a respected man in this county. People notice things. People talk. And a woman showing up alone in her condition. He let the pause do the work. His words were too careful to do. "Well, I thought someone ought to speak to him about it." "Someone ought to speak to him about what exactly?" Savannah said. Ferris looked at her like he'd expected less resistance and wasn't sure what to do with more. "About appearances." "Whose appearances?" He opened his mouth. "Mr. Hayes found a woman and her infant in need of shelter," Savannah said. Her voice was steadier than she expected. "If that's a scandal in this county, I think the county might want to examine its priorities." Ferris stared at her. She held his gaze. She had not done that in a very long time. Held someone's gaze when they wanted her to look away. Her whole body was shaking in a way she hoped wasn't visible, because it wasn't fear. Exactly. It was the sensation of doing something she'd been trained out of, like a muscle memory that had to be broken back in. She held it. Ferris looked away first. He was still standing there with his mouth doing something complicated when Ethan came around the side of the house. He read the situation in about 2 seconds. Savannah standing at the top of the steps, Ferris at the bottom, the particular quality of the silence between them, and he came forward with his hat in his hand and his expression easy. "Howard," he said. "Ethan." Ferris seemed relieved to have somewhere else to direct his attention. "I came to have a word. I figured." Ethan came up the steps and stood beside Savannah, not in front of her, not blocking her, just beside her. It was a small thing. It was not a small thing. "What's on your mind?" "People are talking," Ferris said. "About the woman." "Her name is Savannah," Ethan said. "And I'd imagine people are talking. People in this town talk about everything that isn't their business. What's your concern specifically?" Ferris shifted his weight. "She's a married woman, Ethan. She's a woman with a newborn baby who needed help. I helped her. It don't look right." "Then don't look at it," Ethan said. His voice had not changed in temperature or volume by a single degree. It remained exactly what it was, calm, direct, and entirely immovable. "Anything else?" Ferris looked between them. He was recalculating something Savannah could see at the math he'd walked up here with no longer adding up the way he'd expected. "I'm just saying what people are saying," he said finally. "And I'm just saying what's true," Ethan said. "Thanks for writing out Howard. It's a hot day for it." Ferris left. He untied his horse and he left, and the sound of the buggy wheels on the dry road was the most satisfying thing Savannah had heard all morning. She let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. Beside her, Ethan watched the buggy go with the same expression he'd had throughout, easy, settled, like a man who had already decided and didn't need the other person to agree. "You didn't have to do that," Savannah said. "Do what?" "Stand there like that, next to me." Ethan looked at her. "Where else would I stand?" She didn't have an answer. She wasn't sure one existed. Thomas chose that moment to voice a strong and urgent opinion about his current state of hunger, and Lily's voice came through the screen door. "Is Mr. Ferris gone because Gerald is still in the corner, and I want to make sure no one bothered him?" And Ethan looked at Savannah with something that was almost a smile. She worries about that spider more than she worries about most people, he said. She's got good instincts, Savannah said. And just like that, with the baby crying and the child asking about her spider and the banker's buggy disappearing down the road in a cloud of dust, the morning moved forward. But that evening, when Ethan came in from the cattle and sat down to supper, there was something different in the set of his jaw. Something he was holding back. Savannah noticed it the way she'd learned to notice things in people, the careful habit of a woman who had survived by reading the air in a room before she walked into it. She waited until Lily went to bed. "What happened?" she said. Ethan set down his coffee cup. He looked at the table for a moment. Then he looked at her. "Man came by the south fence line this afternoon," he said, asking questions. "Described you near exactly." Savannah's hands went still around her own cup. "He say his name?" "No." Ethan watched her face. But he was driving a black horse and he had Abilene dust on his boots. He was asking whether anyone had seen a large woman on foot with a newborn, said she was his wife, said she wasn't well. He paused. Said she had a history of making things up. The room was quiet. "He's not here yet," Ethan said, "but he's close." Savannah looked down at Thomas, asleep in the crate Ethan had moved to the kitchen during the day, so she wouldn't be alone with him. The small, even rise and fall of his chest. The way his hands curled at his sides like he was holding on to something in his sleep. "He'll tell people I'm unstable," she said. Her voice was flat, not afraid, past afraid into something colder. "He'll tell them I'm dangerous, that I stole the baby." She looked up. "He's very good at it. Getting people to believe him. He knows what to say and how to say it, and he looks like a man people trust." Ethan didn't argue with her. He didn't tell her it would be fine. He sat with what she'd said and let it be true. "All right," he said after a moment. "All right," she said. "We'll deal with it when it comes." "You say that like it's simple." "It's not simple," he said, "but it's the next thing. And the next thing is always manageable." He stood up, picked up both their cups, carried them to the wash basin. "Get some sleep, Savannah. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." She almost said, "How do you know?" But she already knew the answer, because Derek Cole was one day behind her, and one day was nothing. Derek Cole arrived in Callaway on a Tuesday morning, and he arrived the way he did everything beautifully. That was the thing people never understood about Derek, the thing Savannah had taken too long to see herself. He was not the kind of man who looked dangerous. He was the kind of man who looked trustworthy, which was so much worse. He rode into town on a clean horse with a clean face and a voice like warm timber, and he walked into the sheriff's office with his hat in his hand and his eyes red at the edges. Not from crying. Derek never cried, but from rubbing them with his knuckles for exactly the right amount of time before he walked through the door. Savannah didn't know he was there. Not yet. She was at the kitchen table when Ethan came in from the south pasture with a look she had already learned to read, the settled stillness that meant something had shifted, and he was deciding how to tell her. "He's in town," Ethan said. Savannah set down her cup. "How do you know?" Clem rode out. He hung his hat on the peg. Said a man came into Baxter's Dry Goods this morning asking about a missing wife. Said she'd had a breakdown after the baby came. Said she ran off in a state and he'd been half out of his mind with worry. He paused. Said she had a history of delusions and that the baby needed medical attention she wasn't capable of providing. The words landed the way they always did, not like strikes, but like water slow and wearing, finding every crack. Savannah had heard variations of this her entire marriage. She was used to the shape of it. What she was not used to was hearing it described from the outside, hearing how it sounded when someone else carried it through a door and set it down in front of people who had no reason yet to disbelieve it. "What did Clem say?" she asked. Clem said he'd never seen a delusional woman walk 10 miles on bleeding feet to keep a baby alive, and that the man could go to hell. Ethan sat down. But Clem's one person, and Callaway's got a lot of people with a lot of time and a lot of opinions. Thomas made a sound from the crate in the corner. Not distress, just presence, just the small continuous announcement of his existence, and Savannah looked at him for a long moment. "He'll go to the sheriff," she said. "Already did." And Sheriff Coleman's a fair man. He told Derek there was no law against a woman leaving her own house. Ethan looked at the table. But Derek's talking to Judge Harlan now, requesting a custody hearing. The word landed like a stone in still water. "On what grounds?" Savannah said, and her voice came out quieter than she intended, stripped down to something very thin. "Unfit mother, abandonment of the marital home, mental instability." Ethan met her eyes. "And the fact that she is, in his words, physically incapable of properly caring for an infant." The kitchen went silent except for Thomas. Savannah stood up. She picked up her son and held him against her chest and stood at the window with her back to the room. And she breathed slowly, deliberately, the way she'd taught herself to breathe through the worst of it back in the house in Abilene, when Derek's voice would fill a room, and her only escape was to go somewhere inside herself he couldn't reach. "When's the hearing?" she said. "Friday." 3 days. Yes. She turned around. Ethan was watching her with that direct, steady look she still wasn't entirely used to, not pity, not alarm, just attention. The look of a man who was going to stay in his chair regardless of what she said next, which was either the most reassuring or the most terrifying thing she could imagine, and she hadn't decided which. "You should know," she said, "that he's going to make it very hard for you, being associated with me. He'll say things about you too. He'll find the worst version of every good thing you've done, and he'll say that version loud in public until people aren't sure anymore." "I know men like Derek Cole," Ethan said. "Not like him." "Savannah." His voice was quiet and certain. "I know men like him." She looked at him. Something in the way he said it, flat and old, like a door closing on a room he'd spent a lot of time in, made her stop arguing. Lily appeared in the doorway. She had been very quiet all morning, which meant she had been listening, which meant she understood more than a 6-year-old should have to understand. "Is the bad man coming here?" she said. "Lily?" Ethan started. "I'm not scared," Lily said with the particular precision of a child who is slightly scared and determined not to be. "I just want to know." "He won't come here," Ethan said. "How do you know?" "Because he knows I'm here," Ethan said. Lily absorbed this. Then she walked to Savannah and put her hand on Thomas's blanket. "He's not going to take Tommy," she said. It wasn't a question. Savannah looked down at her. "No," she said. "He's not." The next 2 days were the kind of quiet that wasn't quiet at all. News traveled in small towns, not through newspapers, but through mouths across porch rails and general store counters and church steps. And Callaway was a small town that had been short of interesting stories for long enough that Derek's arrival was received like rain after a drought. By Wednesday afternoon, Savannah couldn't walk to the well and back without feeling the weight of eyes from the road. By Thursday morning, 3 women had come to the gate of the ranch, not to speak to her, not directly, but to speak to Ethan, which was its own kind of message. Mrs. Holt came first. She stood at the fence with her hands folded and her face arranged in the expression of a woman performing concern. "Ethan, I feel it's my duty to say, thank you, Mrs. Holt." "I haven't said it yet." "I know what you're going to say," Ethan said, "and I appreciate the duty you feel. And my answer is going to be the same as it's been." He tipped his hat. "Have a good day." She left. The second woman, younger, with a baby on her own hip, who had the grace to look ashamed of herself, said nothing at all and turned around before she reached the gate. The third was a man, not a woman, a rancher named Pruitt, who had borrowed Ethan's fence posts last spring, and apparently felt this created an obligation. "Derek Cole's got a doctor's letter," Pruitt said. "Says the woman has a nervous condition." "Any doctor can write any letter," Ethan said, "if you pay him enough." "Ethan, I'm just telling you what I know." Ethan's voice had not changed. It never changed. It was the most immovable voice Savannah had ever heard from a man who was not angry. "I know what I've seen in the last 4 days, and none of it looks like a nervous condition. Savannah heard all of this from inside the house through the open window. She heard it and did not go to the door because part of her, the part that Derek had spent 3 years cultivating, believed that being seen would only make it worse. That her presence in every argument about her was the argument against her. Thomas was sleeping. She looked at him and made herself stop. She went to the door. She walked out onto the porch, and she stood there where Pruitt could see her, where the road could see her with Thomas against her shoulder, and her back straight, and her feet still healing, and her dress wrinkled from 4 days of survival, and she looked at Pruitt the way she had looked at Ferris direct, without apology, without the preemptive flinching she'd been trained into. Pruitt looked at her. She watched him recalibrate. "Ma'am," he said, and his voice had changed, gone uncertain. "Good morning," she said. He nodded once and left. Ethan looked at her. She came down the steps. "You didn't have to do that," he said quietly. "I know," she said. "I wanted to." He almost smiled. It was the closest she'd seen him get. Friday came the way dread always came all at once, even though it had been coming for 3 days. The courthouse in Callaway was a single room with wooden benches and a high window, and the permanent smell of old paper, and too many people in too small a space, on too many hot days. It was full by the time Savannah walked through the door with Ethan at her side. She felt the room before she saw it, felt the collective shifting, the murmur, the rapid reassessment of everyone who had heard about her secondhand, and was now adjusting the story to fit what they actually saw. She heard it, the intake of breath from the women's bench. The low exchange of words she wasn't meant to catch, but caught anyway. "Bigger than I thought, and poor man, what was he supposed to do, and still? You have to wonder what kind of woman." She kept walking. Derek was already there. He stood near the front with his hat in both hands and his face arranged in an expression of anxious concern that she recognized the way you recognize a song played in the wrong key. All the notes there, none of the truth. He looked at her when she walked in, and for one fraction of a second she saw the real thing, the cold flash behind his eyes, the private satisfaction, and then it was gone, replaced by something that looked to everyone else in the room like grief. "Savannah," he said. His voice was soft, wounded, perfectly calibrated. She did not answer him. She sat down on the bench Ethan indicated, and she held Thomas, and she looked straight forward. Judge Harlan was 60 years old, and had the face of a man who had heard every kind of story in every kind of way, and had arrived at a settled skepticism about all of them. He called the hearing to order in a voice that brooked no argument, and then he let Derek speak first. What Derek said was everything she'd expected, and worse. He said she had struggled with her nerves since before the baby came. He said she'd stopped eating, stopped sleeping, started saying things that weren't true. He said he'd found her once standing outside in the rain at 2 in the morning, holding the baby and talking to herself. He said he loved her, and he was worried about her, and he only wanted what was best for Thomas, who was his son, his blood, and who deserved stability and care and a proper home. He said all of this in a warm, unhurried voice, pausing in the right places, letting emotion show at the edges, the way a careful man does not too much just enough. The room believed him. Savannah could feel it. The particular quality of a room that has decided. Women whispered to each other behind their hands. She heard her own body described large, slow struggling, as if these were qualities that determined the content of her heart. 2 men near the back made a sound she didn't catch the words of, but understood the tone of perfectly. She looked down at Thomas. He was awake. He was looking up at her, his dark new eyes finding her face the way they always did, that particular fixing of infant attention that meant you. Only you. Judge Harlan looked at her. "Mrs. Cole, you'd like to respond?" Savannah stood up. She had not planned what to say. She had been too busy surviving to plan speeches. So what came out was not a speech. It was just the truth, which was the most dangerous thing she'd said in 3 years. "Your Honor," she said, 3 weeks after my son was born, my husband told me that fat women made weak mothers, and that Thomas would be better off without me. She did not look at Derek. He had been telling me things like that since the week we married, that I was too big to be loved, too slow to be capable, too much of everything wrong and not enough of anything right. He said it so often and in so many ways that I stopped being able to tell it from my own thoughts. The room had gone quiet. "I didn't leave because I was having a breakdown," she said. "I left because my husband told me on a Tuesday night during a heat wave that he was going to leave Thomas in the barn until—" Her voice caught. She held it. "Until I did something about my appearance. And I believed he meant it. Because I had stopped believing there was anything he wouldn't do." She heard the intake of breath in the room, not the dismissive kind. Something else. "I walked 9 days," she said. "I walked because I couldn't drive his truck, he'd taken the keys. I walked because every town I stopped in looked at me the way this town looked at me when I walked through that door this morning, and they made their decision about who I was before I opened my mouth." She looked at the judge. "I am not delusional. I am not unstable. I am a woman who walked across Texas in July to keep her son alive. And I would do it again, every mile of it, every bleeding step." The room was absolutely silent. Then, a voice from the left bench, a woman's voice older that Savannah didn't recognize, said, "My husband did the same, said things, for 20 years. Another voice, younger, "Mine too." And then a third from the very back of the room, barely above a whisper, "She's telling the truth about the barn. I heard him say it, at Baxter's store 2 months ago. I didn't know what to do with it, and I should have said something." Derek moved. It was small, a slight shift of weight, a reordering of his expression, but Savannah saw it because she had spent 3 years watching his face for exactly that kind of small movement, the kind that happened when the room stopped performing according to his script. Judge Harlan looked at Derek. His expression had changed. Then Ethan Hayes stood up. He stood up from the bench where he'd been sitting with his hat in his hands, and he turned to face the room, and he said in that level voice that carried without effort, "A woman who walks across Texas in 105-degree heat with a newborn baby and bleeding feet is not weak." He paused. "She is the strongest person I have ever seen. And any man who calls that a breakdown is either a liar or a fool, and I'll let this room decide which." The silence that followed was the kind that comes after something true and irreversible has been said in a room full of people who had been in the process of believing something else. Derek opened his mouth. Judge Harlan held up one hand. "Mr. Cole," he said, "I'd like to hear more from that woman in the back." And Derek Cole, charming, careful, perfectly calibrated. Derek Cole went very still, because the room had turned. Not because Savannah had become something she wasn't. Not because she had been rescued or redeemed or repackaged into something easier to love. But because she had finally said the true thing out loud in a room full of people, and the true thing once said could not be unsaid. And in the second row, a 6-year-old girl named Lily, who had insisted on coming and who her father had not been able to talk out of it, sat with her small hands folded in her lap, and watched Savannah Cole stand in front of an entire town and refuse to look away. And she decided right then that this was what brave looked like. The woman in the back of the room was named Clara Briggs. She was 53 years old, a widow for the past 6 years, and she had lived in Callaway her entire life. She had known Derek Cole for exactly 4 days, during which he had sat in her parlor on 2 separate occasions, drinking her coffee, and telling her with great warmth and precision the story of his troubled wife. She had believed him. She had felt sorry for him. She had already decided what kind of woman Savannah Cole was before she ever walked into that courtroom. And then Savannah had stood up. Clara Briggs stood up too. She stood up in the back of the courtroom, and she looked at Judge Harlan, and she said in a voice that shook only a little, "I heard him say it. About the barn. I was in Baxter's store picking up flour, and he was talking to Mr. Baxter about how his wife needed motivation. That was the word he used. Motivation." She paused. "I told myself it wasn't my business. I've been telling myself that for 2 months. I should have said something then." The room shifted again, a collective physical thing, the way a body of people moves when the story they were in changes shape beneath them. Judge Harlan looked at Derek Cole. Derek's face had not broken. That was the thing about Derek. His face never fully broke. It only developed cracks, small and controlled, and Savannah knew how to read every one of them. Right now, his jaw had gone tight in a way that meant he was recalculating everything the way a man calculates when the cards he was dealt stop being the cards on the table. "Mr. Cole," Judge Harlan said, "is there anything you'd like to add?" "Your Honor, that woman is mistaken. Mrs. Briggs has lived in this county for 53 years, the judge said. She has no reason to misremember. Savannah is ill. Mrs. Cole walked 9 days on foot with a newborn infant, the judge said. I've heard testimony from 3 women in this room about your conduct, and I have a signed statement from Dr. Aldrich. He held up a sheet of paper that Savannah had not known existed, confirming that Savannah Cole's physical and mental condition upon arrival at Ethan Hayes's ranch was consistent with prolonged physical exhaustion and malnutrition, not with any nervous disorder. The room went still. Ethan looked at his boots for one quiet moment. He had gotten the doctor's statement 2 days ago without telling her, without making it a thing to be thanked for. He had just done it the way he did everything, without announcement, without expectation, without asking her to be grateful. She had to look away from him, or she would not be able to keep her face steady. I am granting full custody of Thomas Allen Cole to his mother, Judge Harlan said in the tone of a man who has made his decision and is not interested in discussion. I am additionally directing Sheriff Coleman to investigate the allegations made in this room today regarding Mr. Cole's conduct toward his wife and child. Mr. Cole, you are hereby ordered to have no contact with Mrs. Cole or the infant until further. You can't do this. Derek's voice had changed. Gone quiet, gone cold, and Savannah knew that voice better than she knew any other sound in the world. That was his real voice, not the warm timbre he'd walked in with. This was what lived underneath. You are handing my son to a woman who cannot take care of herself, let alone a child. Look at her. Look at what she is. The room looked at her. Savannah looked back at the room. She did not hide. She did not fold. She stood with Thomas against her chest, and she let every person in that room see exactly what she was. All of her, the size of her, the exhaustion still visible in her face, the dress that had been washed twice in 4 days and showed it, and she held her son, and she breathed. What I am, she said quietly into the silence Derek had made, is his mother, and I have never needed your permission for that. Derek looked at her. The real look. The one she had spent 3 years on the receiving end of, stripped of performance, of calculation, of warm timber and careful grief. Just the cold, flat truth of a man who had believed she would never stand in a room full of people and say his name out loud. He was wrong. This isn't over, he said. Mr. Cole, Sheriff Coleman said from the side of the room where he had been standing with his arms crossed for the better part of 20 minutes. I think it's time you came with me. Derek left. He left the way powerful men leave rooms when they lose straight-backed, unhurried performing dignity all the way to the door. But he left, and the door closed behind him, and the room let out a breath that sounded like it had been held for longer than one morning. Lily grabbed Savannah's free hand. She didn't say anything. She just held on both of her small hands wrapped around Savannah's fingers, and Savannah looked down at her, this serious, brave, motherless child with flour on her sleeve from the biscuits she'd made before dawn, and something inside her chest moved aside for something else. Something that had been waiting for a room to come into. You okay? Lily said. Yes, Savannah said, and meant it for the first time in a long time. The women came to her outside, not the ones who had whispered on the benches. The others, Clara Briggs first, with her hands clasped and her face carrying the particular expression of a woman making a private accounting of herself. She stopped in front of Savannah and she said simply, I'm sorry I didn't say something sooner. You said it today, Savannah said. It should have been sooner. Yes, Savannah agreed. But today mattered. Clara nodded. She reached out and touched Thomas on the top of his head, the lightest touch, and then she walked away. 2 other women followed, said similar things in different words, and Savannah received every apology the same way, without minimizing it and without enlarging it, because she had learned that both of those responses were ways of managing other people's discomfort at her own expense, and she was done doing that. The young woman who had turned around at the gate, the one with the baby on her hip, appeared last. She had the look of someone who had rehearsed something and then abandoned the rehearsal. "I turned around at your fence," she said. "I'm not proud of that." "What's your name?" Savannah asked. "Ruth Alderman." "Your baby's how old?" Ruth looked at the child on her hip. 4 months. "You come see me," Savannah said, "whenever you need to." Ruth Alderman looked at her for a long moment. Then she nodded quick and fierce, like she was deciding something at the same time as agreeing to it. Ethan had said nothing through all of this. He stood a few steps back and let it happen, which was what she needed from him, which she was finding he had the particular gift of knowing without being told. When the last woman had gone, he came forward and said only, "Ready to go home." The word home did something to her. He meant the ranch. She knew he meant the ranch. But it landed differently than ranch would have, and she suspected he knew that too. "Yes," she said. The drive back was quiet. Lily sat between them on the wagon bench and fell asleep within 10 minutes, which was the privilege of a child who had used up her composure for the day and didn't pretend otherwise. Ethan drove with one hand, and Savannah held Thomas and watched the flat West Texas land move past, and she thought about Derek's voice in the courtroom. This isn't over, and she knew he was right about that, because men like Derek were never over, not really, not until circumstances made them be. But she also knew something else now. Something the morning had put into her bones. She had said his name out loud, in a room full of people. And the room had not split in two. The sky had not fallen. She was still standing. That was not nothing. That was in fact everything. The ranch was quiet when they got back. Ethan unhitched the horse and Lily disappeared inside, still half asleep, and Savannah stood in the yard with Thomas and breathed the dry evening air, and felt the particular texture of a day that had changed something permanent. She heard boots on the ground behind her. Not approaching, just present. "You should know," she said without turning around, "that I'm aware you got the doctor's statement." "Seemed useful," Ethan said. "You didn't tell me. Didn't want to make it into a conversation." She turned. He was leaning against the fence rail with his arms crossed and his hat pushed back, and the evening light was doing what evening light did in Texas, turning everything gold and slightly unreal. And she looked at him and said what she'd been holding all day. "Why are you doing this? All of this. Not the room, not the food. I understand those. But the statement. Standing up in that courtroom. Being on the right side of this when most people in this county decided which side they were on before they knew there was a question." She looked at him. "Why?" Ethan was quiet for a moment. Not the avoiding kind of quiet. The considering kind. "When my wife died," he said, "the doctor said it wasn't anyone's fault. The pregnancy went wrong fast, and it went wrong in ways nobody could have stopped." He looked at the fence rail. "I believed him. I still believe him. But what I couldn't stop thinking about, after what I couldn't put down, was all the time she said she was tired, and I told her to rest and kept working. All the time she said something hurt, and I said we'd see how it was in the morning." He was quiet again. "I wasn't cruel to her. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't Derek Cole, but I wasn't paying attention the way I should have been. And she was too good and too quiet to make me." He looked at Savannah. "You walked up to my porch and asked me to save your baby before you asked me to save yourself," he said. "I thought about that every day since. I keep thinking about how many women do that. How many women make themselves last because they've been told long enough that's where they belong." He pushed off the fence. "That's why." Savannah held Thomas closer. "That's a complicated reason," she said. "It's the true one," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. "Your wife," she said carefully. "What was her name?" "Margaret," he said. "Lily has her eyes. She sounds like she was a good woman." "She was." His voice was even. Not broken, not defended, just honest. "And she would have liked you. She had no patience for people who treated other people as less. Savannah didn't know what to do with that. She filed it away beside everything else she didn't know yet how to carry in the place where she kept things that were too large for right now. The days that followed were not simple, but they were real. Derek did not come back to the ranch. Sheriff Coleman paid him a visit, and then another, and by the end of the second week, word came through Clem that Derek Cole had hired a lawyer in Abilene and was disputing the custody order through proper channels, which meant Savannah was not free, not entirely, not yet. But she was here, and Thomas was here, and the legal machinery that Derek was operating was slow and expensive, and Judge Harlan had been ruling in Callaway County for 22 years without anyone successfully telling him he'd gotten it wrong. She started to breathe differently. Not more easily exactly, but differently. She stopped apologizing for eating, stopped waiting to be given permission to speak at the table, stopped calculating how much space she was allowed before she began moving furniture in her mind to accommodate someone else's comfort. These were not dramatic changes. Nobody would have made a painting of them, but they happened one meal at a time, one morning at a time, and they were real. Lily noticed everything. "You didn't say sorry today," she announced one morning at breakfast with the air of a scientist reporting data. "For what?" Savannah said. "For eating the last biscuit." Savannah looked at the empty plate. "Was it your biscuit?" "No. But last week you would have apologized anyway." Ethan kept his eyes on his coffee. "Last week I was wrong," Savannah said. Lily considered this. "I like you better this week," she said. Ruth Alderman came by on a Wednesday. Then a woman named Doris, who had a bruise on her wrist, she explained away with the particular fluency of someone who'd had a lot of practice. Then two more unnamed, who sat in Savannah's kitchen and drank coffee, and didn't say anything specific, but said enough. She talked to Ethan about the old barn on the south end of the property, the one he'd stopped using when he consolidated the cattle. "It's solid," he said, "just empty." "I want to do something with it," she said. He looked at her. "What kind of something?" "A place," she said. "For women who need a place. Mothers, children. Somewhere they can be safe for a little while and figure out what's next." She watched his face. "If that's too much to ask." "It's not too much," he said. "It's your barn." "It's my barn," he agreed. "And I'm telling you, it's not too much." They started work on it that Saturday. Ethan and Clem and a young man from the neighboring ranch who asked no questions and worked hard. Lily supervised with the gravity of a foreman and fetched water and told everyone the structural opinions she had developed by watching for 30 minutes. Savannah worked alongside them carrying measuring-making decisions, and nobody told her to step back, and nobody suggested she rest, and she did not offer to step back, and she did not suggest she needed rest. By the end of the month, the first two women moved in. The town did not approve, not all of it. Mrs. Holt made her feelings known at church in the particular way of women who frame their cruelty as concern. Ferris at the bank made noises about property use and county ordinances. Two men stopped bringing their business to Clem because he was associated with Ethan, who was associated with Savannah, who was in their estimation a disruption. But other things happened too. Clara Briggs brought quilts. Ruth Alderman's husband left town under circumstances that were not discussed in public, and Ruth moved into the barn with her 4-month-old and planted a small kitchen garden outside the east wall and called it hers. The Reverend's wife, a small decisive woman named Harriet, who had apparently been waiting for exactly this kind of opening, began stopping by on Thursdays with bread and specific opinions about what the women needed that she delivered without preamble or sentimentality. Callaway was not healed. It was not transformed. Some of the people in it were still exactly who they had been the morning Savannah walked through the courthouse door. Cruelty doesn't evaporate when it gets caught in public. It retreats, regroups, finds new language. She knew that. She was not naive enough to believe that one morning in a courtroom had remade anything permanently. But something had moved. And one evening, 3 weeks after the hearing, Savannah was sitting on the porch with Thomas on a blanket in front of her, while he worked at the serious business of pushing himself upright, the wobbly, determined effort of a child who has decided the floor is temporary, when Lily came through the screen door and sat down beside her. They watched Thomas together for a moment. "He's going to walk soon," Lily said. "I know," Savannah said. "He's been practicing. When he walks, can we teach him to ride?" "He's 3 weeks old, Lily." "I know. I mean when he's older." "Yes," Savannah said. "When he's older." Lily was quiet for another moment. Then, without looking at her in the tone of a child who has rehearsed something for a long time and is finally saying it, "Is it okay if I call you Mom?" Savannah stopped breathing. Lily kept looking at Thomas. "You don't have to say yes. Daddy said I should ask first and respect what you said, and not make it weird." She paused. "He didn't say not to make it weird, but I could tell that's what he meant." Savannah set her hand on top of Lily's. "Yes," she said, and her voice came out clear and certain, which was something she had not been sure it would do. "Yes, you can call me that." Lily looked at her then, the serious old young face, the eyes that were Margaret Hayes's eyes, dark and direct, and full of something that had been waiting for somewhere to go. "Okay," Lily said. Then Thomas pushed himself upright on the blanket held for one wobbling, triumphant second, and fell sideways onto his back with an expression of profound outrage. Lily burst out laughing, real unstudied 6-year-old laughter, and Savannah laughed too, and Thomas decided the outrage was temporary, and reached up toward both of them with both hands, grabbing at the air the way infants grabbed at everything they wanted and didn't yet know how to hold. Ethan appeared in the doorway behind them. He took in the scene. Thomas flailing Lily, laughing Savannah with her hand over her mouth and her shoulders shaking, and something happened in his face that she hadn't seen there before. Not quite a smile. Something larger and quieter than a smile, like a room opening up that had been closed for a long time. He sat down on the step behind them without a word, and for a little while in the early evening light of a Texas summer that had started brutal and was ending in something none of them had names for. Yet the four of them just existed in the same place together, and warm and alive. But in Abilene, a lawyer named Pritchard was reading Derek Cole's next filing. And Derek Cole had found a new angle, one that had nothing to do with Savannah's body, or her mind, or her history, one that had everything to do with Ethan Hayes. The filing arrived on a Monday. Ethan read it at the kitchen table, while Savannah fed Thomas, and Lily ate her oatmeal with the focused determination of a child who had decided breakfast was a serious undertaking. He read it twice. Then he set it down and picked up his coffee and drank half of it before he said anything. "Derek's lawyer is claiming Thomas is living in an immoral household," he said. "He's petitioning to have the custody ruling overturned on the grounds that you are residing with an unmarried man of no familial relation, and that this constitutes an unfit environment for a child." Lily looked up from her oatmeal. "What does immoral mean?" "It means Mr. Cole is running out of true things to say," Ethan said, "so he's trying untrue ones." Savannah had gone still across the table. She was looking at her son, not at Ethan, and her face had the particular quality it got when she was working something through, not panic, not even fear exactly, but a kind of cold, interior calculation that he had come to recognize as her at her most serious. "I'll move out," she said. "I can go to the barn with Ruth and Doris. There's room. That way he can't—" "No," Ethan said. "Ethan, he's going to use you against me. He's going to drag your name through every—" "Savannah." He set down his cup. "No." She looked at him then. "You don't understand what he's willing to do. He will destroy your reputation in this county. He will make people believe things about you that aren't true, and some of them will believe it, and none of that will be fair, and it will be because of me." Her voice was steady, but her hands were not. "I can't let that happen." "You're not letting anything happen," Ethan said. "Derek Cole is making choices. Those are his choices, not yours." He looked at her with the directness she still hadn't entirely gotten used to. "And my reputation in this county can manage itself." "Daddy got in a fight with Mr. Ferris once," Lily offered helpfully. "At the feed store. His reputation was fine after." "That is not relevant, Lily. I'm just saying it survived." Savannah looked between them. Something moved through her face. Not quite a smile, not quite tears. Something caught between the two that was more honest than either. "He's not going to stop," she said. "No," Ethan agreed. "He's not. But stopping isn't what we're doing either." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "What are we doing?" He picked up the filing and looked at it once more. "We're going to see Judge Harlan," he said. "Today." Judge Harlan read Derek's new petition with the expression of a man who has seen every variety of legal maneuver and categorizes them not by ingenuity, but by the degree of insult they represent to his intelligence. He read it twice. He set it down. He looked at Ethan over the top of his glasses. "Mr. Hayes," he said, "are you and Mrs. Cole engaged in an immoral relationship?" "No, sir," Ethan said. "Has Mrs. Cole at any point been anything other than a guest in your home under circumstances of charitable necessity?" "No, sir." The judge looked at Savannah. "Mrs. Cole, do you have anything to add?" "Mr. Hayes gave me a room and meals and defended my son's life in your courtroom," Savannah said. "If that constitutes immorality in this county, then I think the county's definition needs revising." Harlan almost smiled. Almost. "Mr. Cole's attorney will receive my response by Wednesday," he said, "which will be that this petition has no legal merit and that continued harassment of Mrs. Cole through the court system will result in consequences for Mr. Cole that his lawyer has apparently failed to make clear to him." He closed the folder. "Is there anything else?" "No, Your Honor," Ethan said. "Good. Go home." They went home, but Derek Cole did not get the judge's response by Wednesday. Because on Tuesday evening, just as the light was dropping low and gold across the pasture, a horse came up the ranch road at a pace that meant something was wrong, and the man on it was Clem, and when he pulled up at the fence, his face said everything before his mouth did. "Cole's here," Clem said. "In town. He's been drinking since noon, and he's been talking since he started drinking, and what he's saying isn't the careful kind of talking he did before. It's the other kind." He looked at Ethan. "I think he's coming here tonight." Savannah came off the porch before anyone could stop her. "Lily," she said without turning around, "go inside." "But—" "Now please." The screen door banged. Ethan looked at Clem. "How many men with him?" "Just himself. His lawyer left this morning. I think the lawyer told him something he didn't want to hear." The three of them stood in the yard, and the evening moved around them, and nobody said the obvious thing, which was that a man who had run out of legal options and had been drinking since noon was a different kind of problem than the careful, warm-voiced man who had sat in a courtroom and performed grief. This was the version of Derek that Savannah knew best. "You should go inside, too," Ethan said to her. "No," she said. "Savannah, no." She turned to look at him. "I have been going inside for 3 years. I have been making myself small and going into the next room and letting him perform whatever version of himself he needed to perform for whoever was watching. I'm not doing that tonight." She held his gaze. "This is my life. I'm standing in it." Ethan looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded once. They heard the horse before they saw it. Derek Cole rode up the ranch road the way he did nothing else that evening, not carefully, not performed, just arriving with the blunt force of a man who had decided that losing through proper channels meant the channels were no longer applicable. He pulled up at the gate and looked at the three of them in the yard, and his eyes went immediately to Savannah, which was always where they went, because she had always been the point. He looked worse than she'd ever seen him. Not physically. Derek kept himself neat regardless, but in the face and the eyes, in the way his jaw was set. He looked like a man who had encountered a wall where he'd expected a door and was still deciding whether to go around it or go through it. "Savannah," he said. "Derek," she said. "Come home." She almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because the simplicity of it was almost beautiful in its wrongness, as if 9 days on bleeding feet, and a courtroom full of women saying his name out loud, and a judge's order could all be undone by 2 words said at a fence. "No," she said. His eyes moved to Ethan. "You," he said. "You have no idea what you've put yourself in the middle of." "I've got a reasonable idea," Ethan said. "She'll do this to you too. She does this, she makes people feel sorry for her. She makes you think she's—" "Derek." Savannah stepped forward, not toward him, just forward, closing the distance between herself and her own voice. "Stop." He looked at her. "You came here thinking I'd be scared," she said. "You came here thinking I'd see you and remember what it felt like when I was. And I'd go quiet and go small and let you do what you always do." She held herself still. "I'm not scared of you anymore. I want you to hear that. Not because I'm brave, and not because I've forgotten anything. I remember everything, every word, every night, all of it, but because being scared of you isn't useful to me anymore. And I'm done doing things that aren't useful to me." Derek's face was doing something complicated. "You are nothing without me," he said. And there it was, the real thing stripped of every layer. Not love, not worry, not the performed grief of a courtroom. Just that. You are nothing. "I walked 10 days through July heat, and I'm standing in a yard with a house behind me and my son inside it," Savannah said. "That's not nothing. That's everything." Clem said from the gate, "I think it's time you turned that horse around, Cole." Derek didn't move immediately. He sat on the horse and he looked at Savannah the way he'd looked at her 10,000 times over 3 years. The measuring look, the calculating look, the look that was always searching for the crack where the pressure should go, and he found nothing. Or rather, he found something there that had not been there before, something solid and settled that his look could not locate an edge on, and she watched him find it and watched him understand what it meant. He turned the horse around. He rode back down the road without another word, and the sound of the hooves on the dry ground got smaller and then stopped, and Savannah stood in the yard and breathed the night air, and felt the whole shape of it, the years of it, the cost of it, the fact that it was over in the way things are over when you simply stop letting them continue. Clem tipped his hat to her and rode after Derek, because someone needed to make sure he left county property, and Ethan came to stand beside her, and for a little while, neither of them said anything. "He'll file again," she said. "Probably. Judge Harlan will rule the same way." "Yes. And eventually he'll stop. Because it's costing him money and not getting him anything." She paused. "That's how it ends with men like him. Not with anything dramatic, just with the cost-benefit going wrong." "That's a clear-eyed way to see it," Ethan said. "I've had time to think." She glanced at him. "Do you want me to go honestly? Say it if you do." "Savannah, I mean it. This is your home and your life, and I want you to stay," he said. Not carefully, not with the weight of a man choosing his words. Just directly the way he said everything that was true. "I want you and Thomas to stay. And Lily wants that too, which she will tell you herself approximately 47 more times before the week is out." She looked at the ground. "I don't know how to do this," she said quietly. "I don't know how to be somewhere safe. I keep waiting for the part where it stops being safe." "I know," he said. "That's not a flaw. That's what surviving does to a person." He was quiet for a moment. But safe things stay safe by being stood in, not by being watched from a distance in case they go wrong. She looked at him. "That's surprisingly philosophical for a cattle rancher." "Lily gets it from somewhere," he said. She laughed. Real laughter. The loose, unguarded kind, the kind she'd forgotten she had, and it went up into the Texas evening and disappeared into it, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't call it back. The community gathering was Harriet's idea. The Reverend's wife had been building toward it for 3 weeks quietly, the way she built everything, laying foundation before anyone noticed the walls going up. She came to Savannah on a Thursday and told her that the women of Callaway wanted to meet. Not the polite women, not the women who came with covered dishes and careful faces and left feeling they'd done their duty. The real ones, the ones who had sat on that bench at the hearing and heard their own stories in someone else's mouth. "You don't have to speak," Harriet said, "but if you want to, they'll listen." Savannah looked at her. "How many?" 30, maybe more. She thought about it for exactly as long as it took Thomas to grab her finger hold on and push himself to standing against her knee. "I'll speak," she said. He took 3 steps before he sat down. 3 unsteady, determined, triumphant steps across the kitchen floor, and then he sat down hard and looked up at Savannah with absolute outrage that the floor had betrayed him, and she was on her knees in front of him before she knew she'd moved, and Lily came through the door at that exact moment and said, "Did he?" And Savannah said yes, and Lily let out a sound that could only be described as a victory cry and scooped her brother off the floor and held him up like evidence. Ethan came in from outside at the noise and looked at the scene. Lily holding Thomas aloft. Savannah on her knees with her hands over her mouth, and he understood immediately. 3 steps, he said. 3 steps, Savannah confirmed. He crouched down to Thomas's level and looked at the boy seriously. "Good work," he said. Thomas grabbed his nose. Ethan's face did the thing it did sometimes, that large, quiet opening, and he let the child hold on. The gathering was on a Saturday evening. Savannah stood in front of 34 women, and she talked for 20 minutes, and she did not plan what she said, because planning implied she was trying to present something rather than say something, and she was done presenting. She talked about the years. She talked about the specific architecture of what Derek had built inside her. Not the dramatic moments, not the worst nights, but the daily accumulation of small diminishments that had done the real structural damage. The way shame worked. The way it settled into the body until you couldn't tell it from your own voice anymore. Women in the crowd cried. She didn't stop for it. She kept going because stopping and waiting for the crying to pass was a way of centering the emotion over the truth, and the truth was what mattered. She talked about Thomas. About 9 days on a highway. About what it felt like to hold a child toward a stranger and ask him to take what you loved most because you'd run out of everything else. A woman in the 3rd row put her face in her hands. Another reached sideways and took the hand of the woman beside her without looking. 2 men at the back, husbands brought along and standing against the wall, had their hats in their hands and their eyes on the floor, and Savannah looked at them and did not look away because they needed to be looked at. They needed to know they were in the room. "I am not extraordinary," she said. "That's what I want you to hear. I am not a remarkable woman who survived a remarkable thing. I am an ordinary woman who walked until she couldn't and then found a floor to fall on. The remarkable part wasn't me. The remarkable part was that the floor held." She paused. "But not every woman finds a floor. Some of them keep walking, some of them stop, and the difference between those outcomes is not the woman. It's whether anyone in the vicinity decides to hold." The room was absolutely still. The barn on the Hayes Ranch is called Margaret House. She said she and Ethan had decided on the name the week before quietly without ceremony, and he had not made it into more than it was, which was the right way to do it. After a woman who was quiet when she should have been louder, and who deserved better, and whose daughter has her eyes. She looked at the faces in front of her. "We have room. If you know someone who needs a floor, send her to us." She sat down. Harriet stood up immediately and said in the brisk, decisive tone of a woman who understood that emotion needed direction to be useful, "We'll need quilts, preserved food, and anyone with medical knowledge to volunteer Thursdays." She looked around the room. "Sign your name on the way out." Every person in the room signed, even the 2 men at the back. Derek's lawyer filed one more petition in October. Judge Harlan dismissed it in 4 sentences. After that, there was nothing. No more filings, no more men on horses at twilight, no more careful, warm-voiced performances in public places. Just the particular silence of a man who had run the calculation and found it wanting, and moved his attention elsewhere because men like Derek always found somewhere else to aim what they were. Savannah received the news on a Wednesday morning. She read the letter twice. She set it on the table. She went outside and stood in the yard and breathed the October air, which had finally turned from brutal to something honest. And she stood there for a long time, doing nothing in particular, which was its own kind of victory. Ethan found her there. He came and stood beside her the way he always came, and stood beside her without announcement, without the expectation that his presence required acknowledgement, just present. The two of them looked at the pasture and the flat horizon, and the particular quality of Texas sky in October, which was enormous and indifferent and beautiful, in the way enormous, indifferent things were sometimes beautiful. "It's done," she said. "It is," he said. "For a while I didn't think it would be." "I know." She turned to look at him. "I need to tell you something." He waited. "When I walked up to your porch," she said, "I didn't believe I was going to survive. I believed Thomas might if someone decent opened the door, but I didn't believe I was going to. I wasn't walking toward something. I was just walking because I hadn't stopped yet." She held his gaze. "You need to know that, because what I am now is not what you rescued. You didn't rescue it. I built it. Here, in your kitchen and your yard and your courtroom and your barn. I built it out of what was already there." "I know that," he said. "I just needed to say it." "I know that too." He looked at her. "Can I say something?" "Yes." "You walked onto my porch believing you were too broken to be loved," he said. "And I watched you stand in front of this whole county and be more than I could have asked of anyone." He paused. "I'm not a man who says things like this easily, or often. But I'd be lying to you if I stood here and pretended I don't know what's happened to me in the last few months." Savannah looked at him. "You don't have to say it back," he said. "I'm not asking you for anything. I'm just being honest with you because you deserve honest." "Ethan," she said. "Yes. I know," she said. "I've known for a while." Something crossed his face, that large, quiet opening she'd seen before the room unlocking. He reached out and took her hand, and it was the simplest gesture she'd seen from another person in years, and it was more than enough. Inside the house, Lily was teaching Thomas a song. They could hear her through the open window, patient, slightly off-key, repeating the same 3 words over and over, until Thomas made a sound that was almost the first word, almost hovering right at the edge of it, the way new things always hovered before they arrived. Margaret House had 7 women staying in it by November. Ruth Alderman's kitchen garden had been expanded twice. Clara Briggs came every Thursday and stayed until dark. Harriet organized. Clem fixed whatever broke. The Reverend preached 2 sermons about community and invisible suffering that left certain members of his congregation uncomfortable in the precise way he intended. The town of Callaway was not transformed. Transformation is a slow thing and a hard thing, and it does not happen because one woman stood up in a courtroom and told the truth. But something had moved in it, some permanent rearrangement, some crack in what it had been willing to call normal. And that crack let light through, and light once in is very difficult to remove. Savannah Cole had walked into this county with bleeding feet and a baby who wasn't breathing right, and nothing in the world except the refusal to stop. She had not been saved by a good man, though she had found one. She had not been rescued by the law, though the law had finally served her. She had not been redeemed by a town's change of heart, though hearts had changed. She had saved herself the moment she kept walking. Every step after that was just proof. Thomas said his first word on a Tuesday in November. He said it clearly, and without preamble, the way infants said first words, like they'd been waiting for the right moment, and had simply decided this was it. He said, "Mama." And Savannah Cole, who had once collapsed on a stranger's porch and begged the world to let her son live, held her boy against her chest in the warm kitchen of a home she had earned and a life she had built, and she said, "I'm here. I've got you. I'm not going anywhere." And she meant every word.